Life Audio.
Hello, and welcome to the Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast. I am your host, John Seidel. This is your home for real stories, radical vulnerability, and remarkable comebacks. In the end, this podcast is a place for the desperate, the downtrodden, the destitute, and especially the drunk. But it's also a place of hope and healing. I know that firsthand because I'm the Christian who became an alcoholic, not the other way around. Today, I've found sobriety after decades of struggling. But more importantly than finding sobriety, I found Jesus. My prayer is that as I interview people just like you and just like me, along with professionals in the fields of trauma, faith, and addiction recovery, you will find the peace that is available to you through Christ on the other side of whatever you're going through and whatever addiction that might be. Because let's face it, we're all addicted to something. So welcome. Let's get radically vulnerable as we explore what it looks like to be on this journey of messy sanctification. We'll be right back after this. Is what you're struggling with right now, think about it, whatever it is. Maybe it's addiction, alcohol, food, porn, a hard time at work. Is that spiritual warfare? Today, we are going to talk with who I think is one of the foremost, if not the foremost, expert on spiritual warfare. He is an incredible human being, and he has a new book out called The Unseen Battle, all about spiritual warfare. His name is Dr. Joel Muddamalle. He has a PhD in theology, and he currently serves as the Director of Theology and Research at Proverbs 31 Proverbs 31 Ministries, and co-hosts a podcast with the director of that ministry, Lisa TerKeurst. And I got to know Joel through Substack, and I just love his stuff. Even though he's a quote-unquote doctor, got his PhD, he is relatable. He has a phrase that he uses. I'm going to botch it, but he'll talk about it in the podcast about, a theology that isn't livable, isn't practical, or isn't helpful. And so he does a great job of breaking down hard to understand theological concepts to where you and I can understand them. And I say you and I even went to seminary, right? And I need Joel to break things down for me. And so we're going to talk today about our addictions and our struggles in light of spiritual warfare. And, I grew up in an environment that over-spiritualized a lot. And so I swung the pendulum. And I think to my detriment, right, is that then that made me more susceptible, I think, to the siren song of alcoholism. And so we're going to talk to Joel about all things spiritual warfare. We're going to talk about how it relates to addiction and then what we can do about it as well. But before we get to that, thank you everyone who has shared this podcast, who has liked, who has subscribed, who has rated it. It really makes a difference. And the book that I've written that is in chorus with this podcast, Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic, is available at christianalcoholic.com. And so if you want to pick that up as well, I would be honored. So without further ado, let's really get into what I think is a powerful conversation and an important conversation that we need in order to do battle, intentional word, against our addictions, whatever they are. Ladies and gentlemen, Joel Muddamalle. Joel, thank you for joining the Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast. This is not a news flash. You're not going to reveal, I don't think, if you want to, some hidden secret addiction. But I think what you are going to talk about today is so relevant to those of us who struggle. And I'm excited to get into that in just a little bit. But thanks for coming on, man.
Absolutely, John. I'm so excited to be with you, and congratulations on the release of your book. That's a huge accomplishment, and we were talking about this offline. I am truly very grateful for your work and for one, your vulnerability to talk about things that most people just are not chasing, like they're like, hey, this is the thing when I wake up in the morning, I want to talk about my, my addictions or where the Lord has brought me through the dark night of the soul stuff, and the first book I wrote was on humility. And I just see that marked all over your ministry and your work. And so I just want to encourage you in that. And I just know that God's going to use it and continue to use it. So this is an honor for me to be able to just hang out with you for a bit and talk nerdy Bible, theology, and life stuff.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Starting off almost making me cry just because to your point, and this is something I want to talk about, is like, man, it's not all roses and butterflies. Like, I feel like I'm going through a season that maybe I might, after talking to you, categorize as spiritual warfare, right?
Yeah.
But I want to make sure I have a good understanding of that because, and this will frame the conversation a little bit, is I grew up in an environment, in a very charismatic denomination where everything was spiritualized, right? It's like you get the prime parking spot at Walmart and it's God's favor because you tithed a little extra the week before, right?
Right.
And so for a long part of my life, I swung the pendulum the other way.
Yeah.
And was just so turned off by anything related to spiritual warfare. Yeah. And now I feel like I've gotten into a better place, but I've been really looking forward to this conversation to maybe hopefully just cement some things. So you've written a new book. It's coming out. It is called The Unseen Battle, and the subtitle is Spiritual Warfare, 3 Rebellions and Christ's Victory Over Dark Powers. Man, talk about a title. I would like to just start out, you're a smart guy, got your PhD. And so if you could just give a quick overview when we use the term spiritual warfare. Yeah. For a lot of people where that has been misused or where they have swung the pendulum, what does that mean? Yeah.
So I think I would want to start with just acknowledging what you said. In fact, I start the book with a quote from C.S. Lewis. I'll paraphrase Lewis, but Lewis in Screw Tape Letters, he's like, basically says, listen, the enemy is equally pleased with one of two options for the believer, an obsession with angels, demons, like the spiritual realm, like this overly upset, like they just see it around every corner. Or the second one is a total neglect. Like they just are like oblivious to the reality of dark powers and a real enemy that is. And so like Lewis is like, hey, it doesn't matter which camp you fall under, both are going to kind of accomplish the goal. And so really my heart behind this book was to say, hey, as the people of God particularly, we really ought to be a people who are aware of the spiritual realities that are around us and also not oblivious or not obsessive, And so like I kind of joke sometimes, John, I'm like, hey, if you're a believer, you believe that Jesus, is who he said he was, I would love for somebody to identify one part of this next statement that is not cosmic in nature, that we believe that Jesus is the actual Son of God, that he's 100% God, 100% man, that he was born to a virgin, that he lived a perfect life, that he conquered sin and death through death itself. He rose again on the third day, hung out with a bunch of people for 40 days, and then literally physically ascended to the right hand of the Father and sits there today. Like, what part of that is not cosmic? It would be like what the whole thing, that like the very foundation of what you and I believe as believers is. So why is it that we either overly obsess about things, or I think tragically for a lot of Christians, they just ignore it. They demythologize it. They act like none of that exists. And so that's kind of like how I wanted to frame the conversation in the book. And then I wanted to deal with kind of that hyper obsessive nature of it. So how would I describe or define spiritual warfare? I actually want to define it and frame it in household terminology, because that's what the Bible does. The Bible frames God's people as a family. God is a father, and as a good father, he wants his family to be together. And sin and a real enemy divides that family. And so now you have the family that is that's disconnected. They are being led astray, and you have God's desire to get his family back together. So from a very simple but far from simplistic definition, this is what spiritual warfare is. Spiritual warfare is the presence of a conflict where God is a good father and he desires to have his family back together. So the reason why I chose the title, The Unseen Battle, is because every battle has a prize. And the question is, like, for spiritual warfare, like, what is the prize of spiritual warfare, of the battle of the cosmos, you know? And the answer is the people. The people are the prize. And so I think sometimes what happens is when we over spiritualize and get obsessive about like power encounters and deliverance, and I'm not even saying anything negative about deliverance ministry or the realities of those things. I'm just saying when we get obsessive about that, we tend to lose the people. We tend to lose, like, what is God after? He's after the return of his lost children to come back into his family. And so, I find it fascinating that throughout all of Scripture, we're never told to, like, go headlong, like seek out spiritual warfare and just go to battle with the enemy. Like, that's not the language of Ephesians 6. The language of Ephesians 6 is actually, hey, it's going to come find you. You don't have to seek it out. This is the language of the enemy. He's waiting. He's crouching. He wants to devour you. There's a patience to it. And so it's almost like, hey, you don't even really need to like try to like seek this thing out. We need to regain awareness of where it is, how it's showing up. And there's the overt areas that it shows up. And there's some really covert areas that it shows up. And that's where I think when you first reached out to me and we're talking about this, like in your book, and I was like, absolutely. I think addictions and alcoholism and pornography and all of these things, these vices that have entrapped humanity, all of these things are all part of spiritual warfare. And the reason why is that some way it is compromising the human. It is distracting us from the deliverance that we can only experience from Jesus, the Son of God. And so, it's like, what does the enemy want to do? Keep the family divided. And how he's going to do it? Through a whole series of vices and through systems and structures in our world to really blind us from the truth of the gospel.
Okay, so let me ask then a very practical question.
Yeah.
Because, so when we think about what you just said, is it like, man, there is there's a demon in the corner of my room that's whispering to me, hey, look at porn. Hey, take the drink. And then, kind of like the demon on one shoulder, the angel on the other. Yeah. Like when we talk about the enemy and we talk about being that warfare, like, is it that tangible, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. So one of the things I want to do is like regain theological terminology and understanding. I think a misunderstanding of spiritual warfare is to have the belief system that this is like the ancient Asian Chinese kind of idea of yin and yang, you've got these equally powerful but opposing powers, and there's this like duality struggle that's happening. That is not what the Bible talks about with spiritual warfare. In the biblical context, spiritual warfare is a battle that's already won. It's a battle that has been sealed and won by Jesus on the cross, and there are skirmishes. There is a real tension that is at play until Christ comes again. And so that's like the first thing is we, and I kind of talk about this in the Unseen Battle, our perspective of spiritual warfare today has to be a perspective from the position of the cross. So we look back onto everything that we're doing from a place of victory, not a place of compromise. So that's kind of like the first perspective thing. And then the second thing is demons are created beings. So there's a little bit of angelology, demonology idea. Yahweh is the uncreated creator. And as the uncreated creator, he's the one who creates all things. And spiritual beings are part of his created order, which means that he is supreme over all things. And so there are things that are incommunicable that are just absolutely unique of who God is. His omniscience, his omnipresence, his omnipotence, like he's all knowing, he's in all places at all times, he's all powerful. These things are unique to Jesus or to God, right? They are not shared amongst spiritual beings. So just think about this. Created beings are limited in time and space. This is true for spiritual beings because they're created beings. Now, is there a nuance in terms of spiritual realm and how that works? Absolutely. But it doesn't take away from the fact that evil demonic entities are not omniscient. They're not all-knowing. They're not in all places at all times. They're not all powerful, and they have been around for a really long time. Right. And so there's a couple TV shows that I think are fascinating. One is about this guy who's like a behaviorist. Like he like watches people, and it's kind of like this magic trick that he does. But like the police end up like hiring him to basically figure out crime things because he's just such a great observer of people's behavior and their tactics. And it comes
Mentalist?
across.
Is that what you're
That's
talking
it,
about?
The Mentalist. Yes.
Yes.
I love it. Like my wife and I watch like every season of The Mentalist, right?
Yeah.
And it got kind of scary like halfway through. Like there's some like really terrifying parts of it, but like I thought it was just so fascinating. Well, guess what? As good as The Mentalist is in that show, like the dark powers are like significantly more like better. Like they're better. Why? They've been around for so much longer. They've been observing, they've been watching human tendencies, right? And so this is like one of those things where it's like, if dark powers are limited in time and space, that means that they're going to have to learn how to be the most efficient they can in this war. So how do they become so efficient? Again, they use systems and structures. There's a reason why the opioid addiction has skyrocketed the way that it has. There's a reason why pornography has skyrocketed the way that it has. Human sex trafficking, right? And I know a topic very near and dear to you, alcoholism. There's a reason, because these things scale at systemic levels. And I truly believe that there are dark powers behind it that are pushing these things forward. And so for the believer, is it possible, like let's talk about in probability, is it possible that there is a dark force, a dark spirit that is oppressing you? Absolutely, it's possible. Is that the most probable reality? I think that we just have to use wisdom and discernment in the process of saying, hey, what are areas of my life that I've compromised because of my own flesh, my own sinfulness? What are some systems and structures that I have bought into? And you could have the influence of the dark powers in that they're pushing alcohol, they're pushing over-the-counter medication, they're pushing idolatry, like your Instagram profile, dude. Like we're being consumed the idea that we are not enough every day. Every image, like every celebrity image that comes our way is like, that's the goal. That's the ideal. That's the way to power. That's the way to platform. That's the way to joy and happiness. And if we think that that's not spiritual warfare, like that's part of the deception, And so I would say, is it possible? Sure. Is it probable? I don't think it's as probable as so many of us think. And I think that there is a responsibility that we have to take account for our own selves and for our own sin. And if there is the presence of actual like demonic entities and encounters, then the Bible has like a path like for us to think about deliverance and to think about prayer as a weapon and the family of God, the community of believers, and having elders, pastors that come and pray over you and anoint you with oil and that like there are things that we have to aid us and to help us in these areas. I just think that we have to be a bit more thoughtful in how we approach it. And I think one of my fears is sometimes we punt to, it's the dark forces versus like, nah, you're lazy. No, you probably need to care about your health a little bit better and your like physical, mental, spiritual health a little bit better. You know what I mean? And then there's other instances where it's like, nah, man, there's something really scary. Like I just had a conversation with a friend, a ministry friend of mine. And I'm like, nah, there's something like demonic that is associated with this whole thing. And so we got to commit this thing to prayer. We got to fasting. We got to fast, And in my book, I actually unpack the difference between possession and oppression. And I actually changed my mind a little bit on the language of it based off of a bunch of like historical, cultural, and Greek work that's done with the words. And so there's like a whole sidebar and whole section that talks about that. And I really think that will be very helpful for believers who have always been like, hey, I've got the indwelling Holy Spirit inside of me. Like, I can't be possessed. I can only be oppressed. And I would respond to that being like, it's not quite as simple as a black and white. There's a little bit more nuance in that, and I unpack it in the book, and I think it'll be super helpful for people.
We'll be right back after this. Okay, so you touched on something that I wanted to ask about. So is there a framework and maybe it's not as simple as a rubric, but how do we, I'm going through kind of a tough season right now, right? Where I'm like, Lord, I think you were leading me this, closed door. Lord, I thought you were leading me here, closed door. What do I do, right? And so to your point, I feel there are plenty of people who be like, man, John, you're that's spiritual warfare, right? And maybe I'm like, is that spiritual? How do we figure out if a difficult season, a difficult thing is spiritual warfare versus maybe some of the stuff you're talking about, or maybe it's God being like, no, I'm just closing doors because I want you to do something else, right? How do we figure that out? Is there a way?
Yeah, First John 4 talks about testing the spirits, and I think the reason why is because there's counterfeit spirits that are out there. And so one of the things that we're supposed to do based off of First Peter 4 is like, we want to identify, like, are these things pointing us to the truth and supremacy of Jesus, or are they distracting us and taking away from the truth and supremacy of Jesus? So, for instance, you can go through really difficult seasons of life, right? And at the end of it, you actually find yourself being drawn closer to Christ. You're finding your dependence is growing in Christ. So this could be spiritual warfare categorically, but the kind of spiritual warfare it is would fall underneath the umbrella of like we live in a fallen world where sin is real and human struggle is real, right? So that's one category. Now there's a different category, I would say, of spiritual warfare, which is demonically influenced. And it's like, I'm looking for things that are out of the pattern, And so it's like, there's like, I can talk about a buddy of mine. It's like getting ready to do a bunch of ministry work. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, he gets like ill. A different kind of illness, like not like I got like the flu or I got COVID, like something like was really wrong with his body. And it's smack in the middle of like 4 or 5 really big ministry things that he was getting ready to do. And that
I think about, is that JP?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's some stuff that's just happening, that's in his life. And like, we're kind of having a conversation about it. And I'm like, yeah, man, that right there to me is like classic textbook spiritual warfare. And so like, we got to pray for you. And I did a post, and I was like, hey, I think like we should, like, I believe in the power of prayer. There's a real enemy that's trying to stop him from going to these college campuses. There's a real enemy that doesn't want to see students get baptized. There's a real enemy. So look at the things that are out of the norm of like the everyday kind of deal, and then see about the pattern of that and the persistence of it. And so if you see a pattern that is growing and a persistence behind that kind of oppressive nature to your body, to your spirituality, I had a thing that happened just a couple months ago, and it was the oddest thing. I would refer to it as like the dark night of the soul. We had some family things that were going on. And, for the first time in my life, John, I had the thoughts like, I don't know that I want to do this anymore. And it was wild. It was like, I don't know that I want to be here. And then your brain starts to go into these really dark places, right? Like, maybe my family would be better off without me. Right. So I'll be like, oh, spiritual warfare, demonic, like a demonic level of oppression, and how is that working? Is there a real demonic entity that's feeding me thoughts and ideas? Is it the leverage of that opportunity of this really hard thing that was going on in my family, in my life, that brought this up, that the enemy's like encouraging? I think my answer to that is just like, yeah. Like, yeah. I don't think we need to necessarily be like, have to figure out the mechanics of it. We need to address and assess like it is spiritual warfare and there is a level of demonic influence. And, Jesus even talks about it with his disciples. There's certain things that can only be dealt with through prayer and fasting, And so it's like, okay, we need to deploy the tools that God has given us, and never forget that you have the exact same indwelling Holy Spirit that raised Jesus from the grave. And so we have to be a people who are constantly living not in self-dependence, but in God-dependence. And spiritual warfare, I actually think, is directly, intimately connected to sanctification. And sanctification is only possible when we realize we cannot do this on our own. Like we can't, this is why Galatians chapter 5 uses proximity language with the Holy Spirit. Keep in step with the Spirit, walk with the Spirit, be led by the Spirit of God. Like it doesn't matter what you do, just stay near the Spirit of God.
Yeah.
But then this is 1 John 4 that says, and by the way, test all the spirits. Because there's some spirits out there that masquerade like the Spirit of God, and they have the power to deceive you, And so do the spirits proclaim Jesus, his death, burial, resurrection, and ascension? These are the things that we want to be discerning along the way.
You said something there that I'd love to hone in on a little bit. Can you explain a little bit more when you talk about the correlation between spiritual warfare and sanctification? Because I talk a lot about messy sanctification in my book, right? Like I look at my story, right? And there are some people who are like, hey, you're a Christian now, but you weren't before because, Christians don't fall into sin like you did. But to your point of like, well, just unpack that spiritual warfare and falling into certain things as part of sanctification.
Yeah, I think once again, like I open up the first section of the Unseen Battle talking a lot about Eden, and I think our anthropology, our study of humanity, often, I come from a little bit of a Reformed background. My theology is way more nuanced these days, but sometimes it's like, oh, your anthropology, your study of humanity has to start with Genesis 3 in the fall. I think that's a really bad place to start our study of humanity, because that's not where the Bible starts.
Yeah, it starts in Genesis 1, baby.
Exactly. It starts in the ideal of Eden.
Yes.
And so it's like we actually have to understand the ideal of humanity before we can actually fully comprehend the tragedy of the fall of humanity,
Yes.
And the story of Genesis 3 until Jesus comes to the incarnation is a story of how can the sanctification process begin to take place to return us to the ideal of Eden. And so I would say sanctification is fundamentally spiritual warfare, because where do we lose our humanity? In Eden. And who shows up? The Nakash, a fiery serpent, right? And the serpent suggests that we should trust human knowledge, like the fullness of our own knowledge, and be disconnected from the wisdom of God. And that's what they do. And in doing so, their humanity breaks apart. And so sanctification is the process of us regaining our true humanity. And I would simplify it this way. Sanctification comes with an aim and an ambition. So our aim is Jesus, and our ambition is to be like him. And where spiritual warfare steps in, spiritual warfare wants us to have counterfeit aims and ambitions. The enemy wants a counterfeit aim and ambition. And the early theologians, like, you think of John Calvin and Martin Luther, they had a Latin phrase called curvatus in se, or something like that. I'm blanking on the exact phrase right now. I'm tired. I just got back from a flight yesterday.
We'll give you a pass on the Latin.
Yeah, it's basically the Latin phrase has to do with the heart being bent in on itself. The heart being, I think it's incurvatus in se is what it is. It's the heart bent in on itself. And so that is directly opposed to sanctification, because if sanctification is about my aim being Jesus and my ambition to be like Jesus, then sinfulness and the enemy wants to say, like, my aim is myself and my ambition is to be whatever the heck I want to be. And if it's whatever I want to be, it's whatever I want to be in the moment, And so when we become the aim, I wrote about this in my first book, The Hidden Peace, on humility. If we become the aim, then everybody else around us become pawns on a chessboard that you and I are totally willing to sacrifice if we have our own needs that we need to have met. Yeah. And so, I would frame sanctification as a process, as a byproduct of spiritual warfare, because the Lord wants us to return to the ideal of Eden. Well, what is the ideal of Eden? It's to walk with God. It's to grow in knowledge and wisdom, not of ourselves, but in the shadow of the Almighty, And so the aim is Jesus, because Jesus is the visible expression of our true humanity. The ambition is to be like Jesus. What does Jesus want us to do? The Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, like totally opposed to the ways of the world, which is, by the way, spiritual warfare. Blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who suffer, blessed are those who are persecuted. Like, if you think about that, like, this actually expands our understanding of spiritual warfare, where often we just relegate it to like demonic activity. Like, and again, I'm not saying that those things don't happen. I'm just saying that the enemy is much more complicated than we give him credit for sometimes. And the complication is like, the enemy doesn't want you to buy into the idea that humility is the path to inherit the earth that God has given us. Notice what the enemy wants us to think you take it by power.
Yes.
You take it by influence. Look what Jesus says on the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the meek, or blessed are the humble. Why? Because they will inherit the earth.
Yeah.
Right? And so again, it's like, I think this is why I'm really passionate about this topic in this book, is because I think it's going to hopefully reframe this conversation in a way that will help us make sense of the battle that's actually being waged right in front of our eyes that sometimes we just don't even have the eyes to see, because we have been taught, or we presume, that spiritual warfare can only look like this, this certain way. And I want to kind of expand that a bit, and put the focus back where God puts the focus, and the focus is his people, his image bearers, being brought into wholeness. And I think what makes a human whole, a human is whole when they are emotionally right, when they're physically right, and when they're spiritually right. It is three parts to a human, and spiritual warfare works itself out in all three areas: in emotional health, in physical health, and in spiritual health.
So I talk about in my first book on faith and mental health, that there's three legs to the stool. Right?
Yeah.
Brain, body, and spirit. And I think that's what you're talking about,
yes.
right? But I think where you're advancing it, which I really like, is that it's not that brain is cordoned off and body is cordoned off and spirit is cordoned. It affects everything, right?
Yes.
And so even at the heart of the brain and the body, if you will, is the spirit. And man, I'm just admitting it right now. I'm totally using the aim and ambition thing. I will credit you as much as possible, but that is so good, because in as I talk about gospel-centered recovery, right? I say aim for Jesus and get sobriety thrown in, right?
Yeah.
Too many people make the aim just sobriety. And if the aim is just sobriety, then like you said, man, it's all off, right? Sure, maybe you're not drinking, but everything else is off still,
Yeah, and I think that's a good one, John, because it's like, if the aim is sobriety, then we're going to be, once again, deceived into thinking that there might be counterfeit helpers to get us to that sobriety.
Yeah.
My own willpower, right? The accountability groups,
Yeah.
And I, what I've learned after all these years of ministry, of being exposed to pornography at a really young age, here's what I've learned: if I want to lie, I'm going to lie. If I want to hide, I'm going to hide.
Yeah.
If I'm going to find a reason to be deceptive with my wife, I'm going to find that reason. What I need is Jesus. I need Jesus to re-aim my ambitions of my heart. Otherwise, I will always look for counterfeit helpers,
Yes.
And so I really love what you said, sobriety is so good, but it's not the ultimate aim. The ultimate aim is Jesus, and on the way, he's going to give you the sobriety. He's going to give you the wholeness. He's going to give you all of those things. But it's like, man, we're being it's the tactic of the garden. Get the knowledge without God.
Yes. Right. And I think you'll know the reference too, but I love it. Maybe it's in Corinthians, where it just talks about, in the last days, the people will just be searching for knowledge, right?
Yes.
And they miss the point, basically.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
I want to turn it now a little bit more towards specifically addiction. When I first approached you about this, right, you're like, man, I would love to talk about how addiction plays into spiritual warfare. And you touched on it a little bit, but I would love to have you unpack that a little bit more. And you talked about the systems and whatnot, but when it comes to, how do you see spiritual warfare intersecting with addictions, not just in the life of the non-believer, but for people like me? And what I'm hearing from so many people since the book came out is there's way more people than we realize who are people who love Jesus, who follow Jesus, who submit to Jesus in many aspects of their life, and yet still struggle with addiction. So how do those two things intersect, spiritual warfare and addiction?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones is just what do we actually believe about Jesus? What do we actually believe about Jesus? And I've often said, John, a theology that is unlivable is unhelpful. And I'm really worried that a lot of people, pastors, theologians, scholars, have been peddling a kind of theology that is unlivable. It lives really nice, 30,000 feet in the air, It preaches
Amen.
really well for viral TikTok reels and Instagram
Yes.
reels. And then you sit back,
Yes.
you're like, what does that mean? Right? Like one of my favorites is like, every setback is a step back. It's a set up
Oh,
for a get up to
for
get.
a
And
comeback.
I'm like, bro, what are you even saying anymore?
Yes.
I do not know what you mean. Like that setback is destroying me right now.
Yes.
I'm not. And guess what? There might not ever be a step up. That
Yeah.
just might be my lived reality.
Yeah.
So in that moment, if I'm peddling to people that every op is an opportunity for greatness and success in your life, I'm like, well, is that like the lived experience of Jesus? Because Jesus went to the cross.
Mm-hmm.
Not yet. Did Jesus rise again from that? Absolutely. But guess what? That's the promise for us. Guess where we have to go through? Death.
Yeah.
The pathway for us to the inherited promises that Yahweh gives is death. Now, some of us, Lord willing, who knows? He comes back and we don't have to experience the first death. Great. But like the vast majority of us are going to have to walk through that,
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I would say the addiction piece. So why I think this is so intimately connected to spiritual warfare is I think that there are things in our world that are neutral. So what do I mean by that? And we might have a difference of opinion here, John. So if we feel free to push back on anything that I say. I look at something like food. I look at something like exercise. I look at something like alcohol. And I go, okay, these are in and of themselves neutral things. In the hands of unhealthy people can become absolutely destructive. And anything can become addictive, right? I am watching more and more people in general and just friends, honestly, that have gone through infidelity and the possibility of divorce because one of the spouses ended up getting super connected to like physical fitness and going to the gym and doing this other stuff. And in the process, meets somebody else there, finds community, and then guess what? A full-blown affair. And the pathway was like an addiction to like my body. What does it look like? Is it good? And then it's like my addiction to being wanted. It's like, oh, I've got this community here and they just love me and they accept me for myself. And notice like it actually in the end like destroys families. It destroys people. And so I think of a passage like 1 Peter 5:8 where, Peter says, be alert and of sober mind, right? Sobriety. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Yes. Right? So notice the next phrase is resist him. It doesn't say seek him. It's not saying find where his hunting grounds are. The text presumes that the enemy is already out there. Yeah. So our goal isn't to find, our goal is resisting the reality of this. So resist him, standing firm in the faith, and look at this, because that the family, look at the familial language, that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of suffering. So on the one end, I would just say like, hey, there's a beauty of understanding that you're not alone. Yeah. And I think that's one of the great benefits of your book, John, is like, there's so many people that are like, wait, I'm not alone. Yeah. I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one who's like a Christian, who loves Jesus, who goes to church, who does the morning Bible study, does all this stuff. And yet I've got hidden bottles of alcohol. And yet I've got an addiction to testosterone injections. Yet I'm on PEDs. Yet I can't stop eating. I just keep stuffing my face with food because it's the only comfort that I get. You see what I'm saying? Like all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, I'm not alone. So that's what the text is saying. But then look how it presumes. How do we deal with this? Is be alert and be of sober mind. So a little bit of nerdy stuff. The Greek word for sober mind is nepho. And so in the ancient world, as soon as the people heard this, they would have thought the antithesis of sober minded. Like what is the opposite of sober minded in the Greco-Roman world? And that word is meteo. And meteo was a very specific kind of idea and word that was used in the time of Paul, particularly in the temples of the false gods of the world, of the nation. So think Temple of Artemis, Temple of Zeus, the Oracle of Delphi, like all these places. And the idea was, in order to know the deity, in order to know the divine, you actually had to compromise your brain. You had to compromise your mind. So you would, Matteo, you would take on, you would take a hallucinative drug to compromise your mental faculties so that you could experience the divine, right? Look at the total you can look at this in 1 Peter 5:8. It's like, be alert and be of sober mind. Don't be intoxicated. Don't buy into the ways. And here's why, because the enemy is prowling. So if you are intoxicated and you've lost mental faculties and you can't discern 1 John, like the spirits anymore, you can get caught up because enemies, they're waiting for you. And so the result of that is like, and I love this about Yahweh, about God. He's like, I don't want you intoxicated. Like, I don't want you compromised. I want you fully aware. Like, that's the kind of relationship I want with you. I want you fully engaged. I want you to perform and to be who I've always intended for you to be, an image bearer of God. And so I would say, like, addiction is so difficult because what addiction does is I think in different categories, ultimately it's promising you some form of satisfaction, some form of control, some form of rescue, you know, but that rescue is dependent on you doing a thing. And that thing is actually sending you into a free fall. Like, you're actually losing all the things that it's promising you. You're losing control. You're losing that sense of security. You're losing all of those things. But it's like, I gotta have another drink. I gotta eat another burger. I gotta, hit the gym like another 5 times in 2 days. Like, it's like, well, no, you're actually like losing yourself. You're actually intoxicating yourself with these other things, And again, I just want to expand it. It's not just alcohol, though alcohol is a big one. Right. It's so many things. It's your obsession with work, man. You can't turn off your phone, dog. Like, bro, put your phone in the other room. I've done this so one of the first things I did was I got rid of an iPhone. Apple Watch. I got rid of that, and my anxiety decreased by like 70%.
I got rid of my Apple Watch.
I'm back. I'm like analog, right? The only thing I've got now is I've got this Garmin for like walking and running, like a fitness watch, but it's disconnected. Like, it doesn't even connect to my phone. Like, it's like disconnected, And it's like, oh, I realized I was addicted. I was addicted to performance. I was addicted to, what if I miss out on information? I was like, is that creating inside of me any kind of peace? Nah, it's not, Right. So, and again, this is all spiritual warfare, because if you're so consumed in that, how can you ever be an active, healthy participant in the family of God, let alone your own family,
We'll be right back after this. Okay, so I'm anticipating someone listening to this and saying, okay, yeah, all right, you're saying that, if I'm getting drunk or whatnot, but Joel, John, like, I'm still like, things are okay. Like, I'm not experiencing these dark nights of the soul that you guys are talking about. I'm not experiencing oppression. Like, I've tested it, and it seems like, even though I'm getting drunk, like, things are fine. Things are okay. Like, how do you respond to someone like that?
I would say you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
I turned 40 this year, John. When I was in my 20s, I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would experience something that I experienced. Just never. And what that has done for me has created a sense of compassion and empathy, and also honesty of saying, if the Lord gives me another 30 years, I might experience that again. Yeah. So what do I need? I need dependence on God. I need to be in the presence of his people. I need to be led by his spirit. And so for the person who's like, well, I'm not, and it's like, I'll just be like, man, be real careful with that perspective, the mentality, because it's in that place often that I've seen where compromise is kind of waiting for you, because look at what verse 8 says. Be alert. Yeah. Like, be aware. The kids today would be like, keep your head on a swivel. Like, man, it something can go sideways really quick. And I would pray, honestly, my prayer is you would never have to deal with that. That's my prayer. Like, my prayer is like, you never have to deal with the dark night of the soul. You never have to deal with the reality of addictions. You never have to go through, I'm sure, John, that's what you would say. Like, you would hope that your book is preventative, right? Like, it would wake some people up to right? That's the best testimony that you could have. And guess what? The best testimonies I wrote this at some point. You can start in the power of the Spirit, but that doesn't mean that you won't end in the vice grips of the flesh. And that doesn't mean that you have to lose your salvation. I'm not even talking about the loss of your salvation. I'm just talking about your efficiency and how effective you are in ministry. How effective you are as a parent, as a mom, as a dad, as a son, as a daughter. Like, why would you want to compromise that?
I it's not just me, but several people that as I talk to them about what happens when they give up alcohol is like, I describe it personally as like taking a limitless pill, that old Bradley Cooper movie. It's like, oh my God, I didn't realize that I was operating with one hand tied behind my back. Then I stop. And so to your point, I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know that there was actually something greater, even just on a very practical level, not even talking about the spiritual level. The spiritual level that I've been able to enter into is just like blows my mind, right? And to your point as well of like, I think about like, we lost someone recently to cancer. And what he didn't know is that cancer was raging in his body for years. And by the time they caught it, by the time that it was surfaced, it was too late. I mean, he lived for a few months, right? And I think for a lot of us, we have that, cancer that's raging in us, and you're like, well, I'm good, right? Until it shows up.
So you're not.
And it's not, and you're like, holy crap, right?
Yeah.
As we kind of come to the end here, I want to ask what I think is, the important question. I mean, they're all important questions, but okay. I realize someone listening to this realizes, they've grasped everything you've said, spiritual warfare and whatnot. I think the question is, so what do we do about it? Right? And then especially as it relates to addiction. So what do we do about it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm going to say anything new or novel or groundbreaking. There's a thought that I've had for a while now, and I just kind of live by it. Honesty and humility go together, but so do pride and insanity. And so I would say like honesty and humility can only live out in the open. And so like there like Jesus doesn't stutter. The Old Testament prophets are not stuttering. The New Testament disciples are not stuttering. Repent of your sin, confess it, and return to Jesus. Like walk with him. And so it's like, what do you do? I think you got to acknowledge it. You gotta become aware of it. There's a difference between awareness and acceptance. You can be aware of something and still not accept it. It's true.
Guilty.
Yeah. And so it's like, you become aware of it. This might be your awareness. Then you have to accept it and say, okay, like this has compromised me in significant ways. And now you got to apply and like step into the new humanity, which is going to be unique for each individual person. But in some form, it's going to have to deal with confession, with exposing the level of your sin that you've got going on. And it is behavior change, but it's behavior change that is motivated by heart affection, right? Again, I was in this podcast in Dallas, and one of the pastors just said, like, how do you fight sin? You fight sin with love. Like, grow in love for Jesus. And that's what it is. Like, what do you got to grow in your love for Jesus, because you don't want to hurt the person that you love, and that's what I would say.
I think it's that, when you talk about, and I go through this a little bit in the book, but the mortification of sin and the vivification, right? It's the killing and then the filling, right? And even that verse that says, do not get drunk on wine. What does it say after that? But be filled with the Spirit, right? It doesn't just end at stopping. Don't get drunk with wine. That's it, right? It's like you have to aim for something greater, because, and that verse that talks about the Spirit's that the Spirit leaving and then 7 more come, right? It's like you got to fill that space, right, with something.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate it. And I did geek out a little bit. Man, I love a good Greek word study, brother. Like it does something for me. Yeah. And with the last 2 minutes, I want to ask you this. This is a kind of a nerdy question too, is one of the things that I appreciated about going through seminary was using the LSB version of the Bible.
Yeah.
Which uses the Yahweh as the name of God. And
Yeah.
I've noticed throughout this that you have used Yahweh.
Yeah.
And I'm curious why, because I think for me, replacing Yahweh with Lord, or modern translations a lot of times use Lord for Yahweh, capital Lord, but it really brought the Bible alive to me in a new way by using Yahweh. I'm curious your use of the word Yahweh.
Yeah. So when I was learning Hebrew in seminary and through some doctoral work, we were not allowed, when Yahweh came up in the Hebrew Bible, to say the word Yahweh. We'd have to use an alternative, Adonai or Elohim, something else. And the reason why is because the ancient Israelites had this deep level of reverence and respect for the intimate name of God as it was disclosed. And then as I was reading throughout the New Testament, I realized the intimacy of the name is actually self-disclosed in the New Testament in Christ Jesus. So the Greek phrase that's used for Jesus is Lord, Kyrios. Well, the very nerdy language stuff, that's the exact word that's used in the Septuagint of Yahweh. So the intimate name of God in the Old Testament is disclosed in the New Testament through Jesus, who is the intimate presence of God. And so when I use it now, it's actually an affirmation that God has always wanted to disclose his personal presence. He's never wanted to be some far off deity that's disconnected from humanity. He's always wanted to be known as a father. And so his self-disclosure of that, it's almost like my way of, in my own brain, of saying, when I'm saying Yahweh in context to the Old Testament, I always have to keep Jesus in mind, because Jesus is the full disclosure of the presence of intimacy of God in the New Testament.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Thank you for that little nerd moment. Joel, if people want to get the book, if they want to follow you on Substack, which please follow Joel on Substack, it is something I look forward to every time. I'm like, please publish more. It's not like you don't have a lot going on. If they want to follow you, if they want to get the book, where can they go?
Yeah, so the book is available on Amazon. I think it's even discounted right now for pre-order. So it releases January 27th, but you can grab it and get all the pre-order incentives and all that kind of stuff. You can follow me on Substack. The Substack is Humble Theology, is the name of the Substack. And John, we're launching a brand new Substack publication, which is pretty exciting. And it is called Stranger Theology. And so it's with my friends, the Blurry Creatures guys. They do a podcast called Blurry Creatures, and it's all about like the stranger parts of the Bible from a theological kind of lens and perspective. And we've got kind of a team of theological writers, like I call them my the Theology Avengers team, and so pulled together a couple people that are going to be regular contributors. And then season 1 is part of like the premium podcast, is a podcast series on the cosmic mountain. And so we're going to go through kind of the mountain motif throughout the scriptures. And so Humble Theology for my stuff, Stranger Theology for all the supernatural realm, spiritual warfare stuff. And then my book, The Unseen Battle, is available on wherever books are sold, but you probably will get the best deal on Amazon.
Awesome. Joel, thank you so much for spending the time with us. We're going to have you on again, because you're going to continue writing and you're going to continue doing some great stuff. And I can't wait to talk to you again.
Thanks, John. Appreciate you.
Usually I try to pick out like one thing to highlight at the end here that I really like. That's hard for me, because I think there's so much. And if you're watching the version of this podcast at the Veritas Daily, I think you'll see my fist pumps, you'll see my points, you'll see my smiles, you'll see me mouthing the word yes, 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 because so much of what Joel said there is so applicable and so helpful. And, I like I said, I'm a sucker for a good Greek word study. And so what he talked about, even just at the very end there about Yahweh, but that term, the use of the word that's opposite of sober-minded. And man, I think about so many of the times that I wanted to escape and from the difficulties. And listen, man, can I be honest with you? I had a conversation with my wife yesterday where I'm like, you know what my flesh wants to do right now? My flesh wants to escape. And it wants to use a substance to escape. And I just had to say that. I had to speak that and name that. My wife's not like, oh, how dare you? She's like, I get it. And so let's do this instead. right? And because in those moments where we escape and quote unquote turn our minds off, I just think we are so susceptible to the lies of the enemy. We are so susceptible to the lies of the enemy and what he wants us to believe versus the truth that Jesus has offered us. If anything in this podcast encouraged you, just 20 seconds, if you would do me a favor, if you would share it with someone. They don't have to be someone that struggles with addiction. I try to make, even when we talk about addiction, I think try to make these podcasts applicable to people in many walks of life. And so I think this one is definitely one of those, right? Where it's not just about those who struggle with addiction, and especially not just people who struggle with addiction to a substance, but as Joel was talking about, exercise, food, your phone, pornography, work, it's all applicable. Love you all so much. Remember to go visit our partner Life Audio, lifeaudio.com, where you can listen to other great podcasts like this one. Love you. Appreciate you. We'll see you next week.